All right, so we're doing Chapter 9, Part 3. This will not be a long video. Basically what we're doing is in the first two sections or first two parts here, we were talking about graphing. In the last chapter, we talked about solving quadratic functions. Here we're still solving quadratic functions, but we're using it in a different method. So what the main thing that we want to get across here is we're using square roots to solve quadratics. Now, let's be clear about this. The only way to solve a quadratic with a square root is if we're missing the x term. So when we normally see ax squared plus bx plus c, this is our normal quadratic right here. The only way that we can use square roots to solve is if this term is missing in some way, shape, or form. We can only have a constant and we can only have an x squared term. And you'll see that here. There's no x terms in either one of these. So this is what we do. We solve it by basically getting our x squared by itself. So we're going to solve our equations the exact same way we always have, by getting our x by itself, but in this case it will be our x squared to start. So to get our x squared by itself, we have to get rid of our 2, so we divide both sides by 2. So that will leave us with x squared equals 4. Now, here's the one part that's going to be new for many of you, is now we're going to solve by using square roots. Why is it using square roots? Because to eliminate a squared, we don't divide by 2, we don't do any of that stuff. Because it's squared, we will take the square root of both sides to eliminate this. Now, what's going to happen is, and I'm going to actually get rid of this square root, I'm going to do a new line. When you take the square root of both sides to solve or to eliminate an x squared, you need to make sure that when I take the square root of the left-hand side and I take the square root of the right-hand side, it is a plus or minus on the outside. So the square root and the squared will cancel out, and that's what we were trying to do in the first place. That's why we do it. That cancels everything out. So we're left with x equals plus or minus 2. And again, if you think about that solution, think about this right here. If I put a negative 2 in, negative 2 squared equals 4. That's why negative 2 is a solution. And positive 2 squared equals 4. That's why positive 2 is a solution. Okay? So that's how we're going through these. We're solving these exactly like we normally did with old equations, but at the very end, to get rid of our squared, we have to take the square root of both sides and have plus or minus. So second example, again, let's get our x squared by itself. First thing, always get rid of that constant. So we're going to add 11 to both sides. So we end up with 2x squared equals 31. Divide both sides by 2. We're left with x squared equals 15.5. Okay, and then we take the square root of both sides. So taking the square root of both sides, and again I'm going to write that separately. And don't forget, it's got to be plus or minus square root. Okay, so we end up with x equals 3.937, and that's plus or minus. Two solutions. Okay, so that's really it. That's all we're doing to solve here. Keep in mind, when you're solving these, we are just getting x by itself. So we're moving everything away from the x to get x by itself. So we first start by trying to get the x squared by itself, and then once we get the x squared by itself, we are just simply taking the square root of both sides to get a plus or minus. It's the same process as solving equations, except for the last part where we take the square root of both sides to get our answer. And keep in mind, we'll always get two answers there. There are examples, or there are times where we won't get any answers, no solutions, and there's also times where we may only get one solution. But we will talk about that as we reach it. Okay, so that's it for this video. Real short. Hopefully it made sense, and we'll see you in class.